This week, it's a who's who of world leaders visiting the Pope. The Council of Cardinals rolls out some groundbreaking reforms. And the Pope had pointed words about technology for young people in Sarajevo. Hello and welcome to this edition of Vatican Connections. It's been a full week. The Council of Cardinals were meeting, and we'll take a look at that later in the program. But first, while the leaders of G7 countries met in Germany, the Vatican's C9, or Council of Cardinals, met in Vatican City this week. In a brief statement on Monday, the Vatican said the Cardinals are continuing their work of reforming the Curia. On Monday, they dedicated themselves to writing the first draft of the preamble to the new constitution. Then they heard reports from several different people. Let's take a look. Cardinal Sean O'Malley presented a report with recommendations from the Commission for the Protection of Minors regarding the accountability of bishops. The Commission is recommending creating a separate judicial sector within the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith to deal with bishops who are alleged to have covered up or ignored child abuse. They also recommended that the sector be given its own permanent staff and that the whole system be reviewed in 5 years to see how effective it has been and how to improve. Pope Francis has accepted their recommendations. Then they heard from Cardinal George Pell, who gave an overview of the financial reforms carried out so far at the Vatican and the reforms he plans to roll out next. He has proposed the creation of 3 new working groups, one to analyze the Vatican's investments and assets, a second for human resources, and a third to look at all the IT systems in place at the Vatican and determine how efficient they are and how compatible they are. Now, because a lot of departments, well, most departments operate almost completely autonomously, all of them have their own human resources practices and their own computer systems, which are totally separate from each other and probably completely incompatible with any other department. Then the C9 heard from Monsignor Eduardo Vigano, the head of Vatican Television and the head of the committee that has been appointed to oversee the reform of the Vatican's media and communication outlets. Now, the Vatican spokesperson, Father Federico Lombardi, said Monsignor Vigano presented a 4-year plan for gradually integrating and reforming the Vatican's communication offices. He said, expect the creation of a new dicastery in the next few months. That dicastery will include the current Pontifical Council for Social Communication, the Press Office, Vatican Radio, L'Osservatore Romano, the Publishing House, the Photo Service, Vatican Television, and the printing press, as well as the Internet Office. There's no word yet on who might be made the head of that dicastery. Now remember, Monsignor Vigano's commission is not starting from scratch. They are working with the reform recommendations made by Lord Christopher Patten and his panel of international Catholic journalists. That commission identified ways that the Vatican must change to better get its message out, and also drew up an implementation plan. Now it's time to put that plan into action. Finally, the Council of Cardinals heard from Father Michael Zerny from the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace. He told them about the toolkit being sent to bishops in preparation for the release of the Pope's encyclical Laudato Si. The kit offers reflections, questions, and ideas to help lead the conversation on the encyclical instead of hearing about it from the media. Pope Francis visited Sarajevo over the weekend. We'll have more on that visit later in the program. Now, when on the flight back to Rome, Pope Francis answered a few questions about why he has visited specific countries and cities, and a question about the alleged apparitions at Medjugorje. First of all, Pope Benedict XVI established a commission of prelates to study the alleged apparitions there. Pope Francis said that the commission has given him their final report and recommendations, and now the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith has to hold a meeting to review that report, and then the conclusions of that study can be released to the public. Pope Francis said for now, they're just giving guidelines and advice to bishops regarding Medjugorje. Dioceses and parishes are not supposed to organize official pilgrimages to Medjugorje, but priests there are asked to provide spiritual care for people who visit the town. On a different note, the papal almoner, Archbishop Konrad Krajewski, has found another way for the Vatican to serve the poor. He is opening a 30-bed overnight shelter just steps away from the Vatican. Over the last year, he's installed showers in a specially dedicated washroom in St. Peter's Square, opened a free barber shop, and he regularly spends time outside Vatican walls giving meals to the area's homeless with the help of some off-duty Swiss guards. A building on Via dei Penitenzieri, just off Via della Conciliazione, has reportedly been chosen as the venue for the shelter and is currently being renovated. There's no word yet on when the shelter will be ready to receive guests, but we know it will be staffed by volunteers. And finally, there was a very special concert at the Jesuits' mother church in Rome. The renowned Italian composer and director Ennio Morricone has written a mass setting for Pope Francis and the Jesuits. At 86 years of age, this is the first time he's composed a mass. In an interview with the Italian newspaper L'Avvenire, he said he was asked back in 2012 to write a mass setting by the Jesuits for their 200th anniversary of the re-establishment of the order. In the meantime, Pope Francis was elected, and that took on a whole new meaning. He also said he didn't try to adopt any established musical styles for the Mass because he wanted his own style to be recognizable in the setting. He said there is a little bit of an echo of the score from the Mission at the beginning and end of the Mass. Morricone said it was a kind of a way to close the circle of the Jesuits' history. The concert was held on Wednesday and is available on demand on the RAI website. Check our blog for details. Let's take a look at what Pope Francis has been doing this week. On Saturday, June 6th, he flew to Sarajevo. In a message he sent before the trip, he said he was visiting that city to bring a message of peace and confirming the Catholics in their faith. CNS has some of the highlights from that day.
Sarajevo e la Bosnia ed Erzegovina rivestono uno speciale significato per l'Europa e per il mondo intero. Da secoli in questi territori sono presenti comunità che professano religioni diverse e appartengono a diverse etnie e culture, ciascuna delle quali è ricca delle sue peculiari caratteristiche e gelosa delle sue specifiche tradizioni. Anche la stessa struttura architettonica di Sarajevo ne porta visibili e consistenti tracce, poiché nel suo tessuto urbanistico sorgono a breve distanza l'una dall'altra sinagoghe, chiese e moschee, tanto che la città ricevette l'appellativo di Gerusalemme d'Europa. In questa terra la pace e la concordia tra croati, serbi e bosniaci, le iniziative volte ad accrescere ulteriormente le relazioni cordiali e fraterni tra musulmani, ebrei, cristiani e altre minoranze religiose rivestono un'importanza che va ben al di là dei suoi confini. Esse testimoniano al mondo intero che la collaborazione tra varie etnie e religioni in vista del bene comune è possibile, che un pluralismo di culture e tradizioni può sussistere e dare vita a soluzioni originali ed efficaci dei problemi, che anche le ferite più profonde possono essere sanate da un percorso che purifichi la memoria e dia speranza per l'avvenire. pace è il sogno di Dio, è il progetto di Dio per l'umanità, per la storia, con tutto il creato. Ed è un progetto che incontra sempre opposizione da parte dell'uomo e da parte del maligno. Anche nel nostro tempo l'aspirazione alla pace e l'impegno per costruirla si scontrano col fatto che nel mondo sono in atto numerosi conflitti armati. È una sorta di terza guerra mondiale combattuta a pezzi e nel contesto della comunicazione globale si percepisce un clima di guerra. All'interno di questo clima di guerra, come un raggio di sole che attraversa le nubi, risuona la parola di Gesù nel Vangelo: beati gli operatori di pace. È un appello sempre attuale, che vale per ogni generazione. Non dice beati i predicatori di pace. Tutti sono capaci di proclamarla, anche in maniera ipocrita o addirittura menzognera. No, dice beati gli operatori di pace, cioè coloro che la fanno. Fare la pace è un lavoro artigianale, richiede passione, pazienza, esperienza, tenacia. Beati solo coloro che seminano pace con le loro azioni quotidiane, con atteggiamenti e gesti di servizio, di fraternità, di dialogo, di misericordia. Questi sì saranno chiamati figli di Dio, perché Dio semina pace, sempre, dovunque. Nella pienezza dei tempi ha seminato nel mondo il suo Figlio, perché avessimo la pace.
Now, another key meeting during the trip was a visit to the John Paul II Youth Center, which is open to young people of all faiths. The hope is that bringing young people together for fun things, they'll learn to get over their different backgrounds. Now, he spoke to them about something they all know about, technology and media.
Nel tempo dell'immagine si deve fare lo stesso che si faceva nei tempi dei libri. Scegliere le cose che mi fanno bene. E qui due cose. Prima, la responsabilità dei centri televisivi di fare programmi che fanno bene i valori, che costruiscano la società, che ci portino avanti, non che ci portino giù. Fare programmi che ci aiutano a che i valori, i veri valori, divengano più forti e ci preparino per la vita. Questa è responsabilità dei centri televisivi. Secondo, sapere scegliere i programmi, responsabilità nostra. Se io vedo che un programma non mi fa bene, mi butta giù i valori, mi fa diventare volgare, anche nella volgarità, anche nelle sporcizie, io devo cambiare canale. E poi c'è un terzo punto, il punto della cattiva fantasia, di che è la fantasia che uccide l'anima. Se tu, che sei giovane, vivi attaccato al computer e diventi schiavo del computer, tu perdi la libertà. E se tu nel computer cerchi i programmi sporchi, tu perdi la dignità. vedere televisione, usare il computer, ma per le cose belle, le cose grandi, le cose che ci fanno crescere.
And at the end of that whirlwind day, he still had the energy for a short press conference on board the flight to Rome. The first question off the top was about Medjugorje. He said a decision is coming soon. Asked about upcoming visits, he said he wants to visit the smallest European countries and those that have suffered, like the Balkans. Asked about his talk with young people of Sarajevo on media and technology, he said there are really two elements to consider: content and the way we use our technology. The destructive way of using it, of course, is by being permanently connected, that destroys our relationships. But at the same time, the virtual world is like a language that we have to know how to speak in order to use it for good. Then, of course, the other consideration, he said, is the content. Watching TV is fine, but watching programs that are void of any values or are, quote, semi-pornographic, plays into hedonism and feeds the consumerist, relativistic tendencies that attack our society like a cancer. Back at the Vatican on Sunday, Pope Francis met with Argentine President Cristina Kirchner. That was to be her last visit as president. Argentina holds elections in the fall and she cannot run again. Now, their meeting was behind closed doors in a study at the Paul VI Hall. The meeting lasted more than an hour and a half. Afterwards, they exchanged gifts. The Pope gave her an icon of Our Lady of Tenderness. It's a replica of a Russian icon. And Kirchner gave the Pope several books: a portrait of Blessed Oscar Romero painted by an Argentine artist, a basket of typical Argentine foods, and a copy of the epic poem Martin Fierro, which he often quotes. Wednesday was the general audience. He continued his catechesis on the family and spoke about the family as a hospital. CNS has more.
La famiglia, possiamo dire, è stata sempre l'ospedale più vicino. Ancora oggi, in tante parti del mondo, l'ospedale è un privilegio per pochi e spesso è lontano. Sono la mamma, il papà, i fratelli, le sorelle, le nonne che garantiscono le cure e aiutano a guarire. Di fronte alla malattia, anche in famiglia, sorgono difficoltà a causa della debolezza umana, ma in genere il tempo della malattia fa crescere la forza dei legami familiari e penso a quanto è importante educare i figli fin da piccoli alla solidarietà nel tempo della malattia. Un'educazione che tiene al riparo dalla sensibilità per la malattia umana inaridisce il cuore e fa sì che i ragazzi siano anestetizzati verso la sofferenza altrui, incapaci di confrontarsi con la sofferenza e di vivere l'esperienza del limite. La debolezza e la sofferenza dei nostri affetti più cari e più sacri possono essere per i nostri figli e i nostri nipoti una scuola di vita. Educare ai figli e ai nipoti a capire questa vicinanza nella malattia in famiglia. E lo diventano quando i momenti della malattia sono accompagnati dalla preghiera e dalla vicinanza affettuosa e premurosa dei familiari. La comunità cristiana sa bene che la famiglia nella prova della malattia non va lasciata sola.
On Wednesday afternoon, the Pope met with Russian President Vladmir Putin, who showed up more than an hour late for the meeting. He presented the Pope with a picture of the Church of Jesus Savior in Moscow, which was recently rebuilt, actually. The Pope gave the Russian president a medal depicting the Angel of Peace and a copy of his exhortation Evangelii Gaudium. Their private conversation lasted almost 1 hour, and they talked about the conflict in Ukraine and the situation in the Middle East. Now, Pope Francis is said to have reminded Putin that there needs to be a sincere effort to make peace and a return to dialogue so that the Minsk Accords can be enacted. Now, he also reinforced the fact that attention is urgently required for the grave humanitarian situation in Ukraine. But turning to the Middle East, the discussion centered on the need for peace in Syria and Iraq and the need for concrete involvement from the whole international community. And on Thursday was the Canadian Prime Minister's turn to meet with Pope Francis. In a communiqué, the Vatican said they discussed the good relations between the Holy See and Canada, the spirit of collaboration between the government and the Church in the country. They also discussed international political issues, including, of course, the Middle East, the fight against terrorism, and environmental issues. Now, the Prime Minister's office said he brought up the letter sent to the Pope by Canada's Minister for Aboriginal Affairs, requesting an apology for the abuse that happened in church-run residential schools in Canada, and that he invited Pope Francis to visit Canada in 2017 for the 150th anniversary of Confederation. The Vatican communiqué did not mention the invitation or the letter from the Minister of Aboriginal Affairs. Now, you'll recall Pope Benedict XVI actually did apologize for the abuse suffered in residential schools back in 2009. And a notable absence this week, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro canceled his visit to the Vatican at the very last minute, saying he had the flu and an ear infection. Now, Spanish-language media were quick to report that actually he was scared of being reprimanded by the Pope for the alleged human rights violations in Venezuela. Opposition politicians in the country have been put in jail, and some are even carrying out hunger strikes. Now, 2 Venezuelan councilmen from San Cristobal actually went on a public hunger strike in St. Peter's Square in advance of Maduro's scheduled visit. What was the real reason for Maduro's cancellation? We'll never really know. Allegations of torture and imprisonment of political opponents continue to emerge from Venezuela. Let's take a look at the resignations and nominations that were announced this week. The Pope appointed an Auditor General for the Holy See. This was one of the many reforms that was brought in by the Secretariat for the Economy. The new Auditor General is a layman, Libero Milone. He has extensive experience as an auditor. Among other things, he was partner and CEO at Deloitte Touche Italy, now known as Deloitte. He was also a member of the Audit Committee for the World Food Programme, a risk auditor for Fiat, and several other European companies. Berlin, Germany has a new archbishop. The Pope appointed Bishop Heiner Koch of Dresden to lead that diocese. Minsk, Mohilev has a new auxiliary bishop, Father Alexander Yashuvsky. He is a Salesian priest originally from Grodno, Belarus. Vatican Connections is interactive. We answer your questions and explain things you want to know. You can reach us on Twitter at VatiConnections or by email at info@saltandlighttv.org. We'll try our best to answer your questions during this part of our show. Well, that's all for this edition of Vatican Connections. Join us again next time for more about what's going on at the Vatican. As always, you can follow us on Twitter or Facebook for updates and watch us on Roku TV on demand. From everyone here, thanks for watching. See you next time.